A History of the Anti-War Movement. Chapter 1. A History of People Against War. Essays at ushistory.org/us/55d.asp. Start at ushistory.org/us/55d.asp, which is an essay on the anti-war movement. When you get to the bottom of the page and click next to get to the Nixon years. Keep clicking next to get a good essay on the anti-war movement to the present. A summary of en.wikipedia.org/wiki/anti-war_movement. English poet Robert Southey's 1796 poem After Blenheim is an early modern example of anti-war literature that was written generations after the Battle of Blenheim but while Britain was again at war against France. American Revolutionary War. Substantial opposition to British war intervention in America led the British House of Commons on February 27, 1783 to vote against further war in America, paving the way for the Second Rockingham Ministry and the Peace of Paris. Antebellum United States. Substantial anti-war sentiment developed in the United States roughly between the end of the War of 1812 and the commencement of the Civil War in what is called the antebellum era. A similar movement developed in England during the same period. The movement reflected both strict pacifist and more moderate non-interventionist positions. Many prominent intellectuals of the time, including Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, C. Civil Disobedience, and William Ellery Channing contributed literary works against war. Other names associated with the movement include William Ladd, Noah Worcester, Thomas Cogswell Upham and A.S.A. Mahan. Many peace societies were formed throughout the United States, the most prominent of which being the American Peace Society. The Book of Peace is an anthology produced by the American Peace Society in 1845. A distinct feature of antebellum anti-war literature is war contributes to a moral decline and brutalization of society in general. American Civil War. A key event in the early history of the modern anti-war stance in literature and society was the American Civil War, where it culminated in the candidacy of George B. McClellan for U.S. President as a peace Democrat against incumbent President Abraham Lincoln. The outlines of the anti-war stance are seen. The argument of the costs of maintaining the present conflict not being worth the gains that can be made. The appeal to end the horrors of war. War being waged for the profit of particular interests. During the war, the New York draft riots were started as violent protests against Lincoln's Enrollment Act of conscription to draft men to fight in the war. The outrage over conscription was augmented by the ability to buy one's way out, which could be afforded only by the wealthy. After the war, the Red Badge of Courage described the chaos and sense of death which resulted from the changing style of combat, away from the set engagement and towards two armies engaging in continuous battle over a wide area. Second Boer War. William Thomas Stead formed an organization against the Second Boer War, the Stop the War Committee. World War I. In Britain, in 1914, General Horace Smith Dorrien says that war should be avoided at almost any cost, that war would solve nothing, that the whole of Europe and more besides would be reduced to ruin and that the loss of life would be so large that whole populations would be decimated. All anti-war people were quickly shamed with the onset of war. The pro-war media machine is owned by the warring countries and military companies. The Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918 gave the American authorities the right to close newspapers and jail individuals for having anti-war views. On June 16, 1918, Eugene V. Debs made an anti-war speech and was arrested under the Espionage Act of 1917. He was convicted, sentenced to serve 10 years in prison, but President Warren G. Harding commuted his sentence on December 25, 1921. Between the World Wars. In 1924, Ernst Friedrich published Krieg dem Krieg. War Against War, an album of photographs drawn from German military and medical archives from the First World War. The book described as photography as shock therapy that was meant to horrify and demoralize. In the 1930s, the Western anti-war movement took shape. Characteristics of the anti-war movement include opposition to the corporate interests benefiting from war, The status quo trading the lives of the young for the comforts of older people. Poor families fight a war in place of privileged individuals who were able to avoid the draft and military service. In 1933, the Oxford Union resolved in its Oxford Pledge, that this House will in no circumstances fight for its king and country. War veterans, including U.S. General Smedley Butler, spoke out against wars and war profiteering on their return to civilian life. Veterans were still extremely cynical about the motivations for entering World War I, but many were willing to fight later in the Spanish Civil War, indicating that pacifism was not always the motivation. These trends were depicted in novels such as All Quiet on the Western Front, For Whom the Bell Tolls and Johnny Got His Gun. World War II. There was protest at the White House by the American peace mobilization opposition to World War II. Communist-led organizations, including veterans of the Spanish Civil War, opposed the war. There wasn't much anti-war protest during WW2. I remember watching the 1941 movie Sergeant York with Gary Cooper. He was portrayed as a WW1 war hero. They spent a lot of time at the beginning of the movie convincing Alvin York, a country boy Christian, that the Bible says it's all right to fight if confronted by evil people. The Cold War. Authors wrote books like 1984, Catch-22, Slaughterhouse-Five and The Tin Drum. Jack Kerouac wrote On the Road in 1947, published in 1957, about a new group of people living for themselves, not for their society. This started new thinking about devotion to society. We're individuals. Just because somebody tells me to fight in their war doesn't mean anything to me. The Vietnam War. Vietnam War protests started with a free-spirited rock and roll, hippie movement compounded with TV images showing death and destruction of war. In 1967, a coalition of anti-war activists formed the National Mobilization Committee to End the War in Vietnam, which organized several large anti-war demonstrations between the late 1960s and 1972. Countercultural songs, organizations, plays and other literary works encouraged a spirit of nonconformism, peace and anti-establishmentarianism. This anti-war sentiment developed during a time of student activism on the heels of the civil rights movement. Vietnam veterans, including future Secretary of State and U.S. Senator John Kerry and disabled veteran Ron Kovic, spoke out against the Vietnam War on their return to the United States. MRS. Ngo Ba Ton, a Vietnamese peace activist, aligned her Vietnamese women's movement for the right to live with international activists of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, WILPF, and Women's Strike for Peace. Her imprisonment and publications about the war brought international attention to the social and economic issues created by the war and fostered international opposition to it. Yugoslavia war protests. The anti-war protests in Belgrade were held mostly because of opposition the Battle of Vukovar, Siege of Dubrovnik and Siege of Sarajevo, while protesters demanded the referendum on a declaration of war and disruption of military conscription. More than 50,000 people participated in many protests, and more than 150,000 people took part in the most massive protest called the Black Ribbon March in solidarity with people in Sarajevo. The most famous associations and NGOs who marked the anti-war ideas and movements in Serbia were the Center for Anti-War Action, Women in Black, Humanitarian Law Center and Belgrade Circle. About 2,000 Serbian Americans and anti-war activists protested in New York City against NATO airstrikes, while more than 7,000 people protested in Sydney. The most massive protests were held in Greece, and demonstrations were also held in Italian cities, London, Moscow, Toronto, Berlin, Stuttgart, Salzburg, and Skopje. Afghanistan War opposition. There was initially little opposition to the 2001 Afghanistan War in the United States and the United Kingdom, which was seen as a response to the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks and was supported by most of the American public. Most vocal opposition came from pacifist groups and groups promoting a left-wing political agenda. Over time, opposition to the war in Afghanistan has grown more widespread, partly as a result of weariness with the length of the conflict and partly as a result of a conflating of the conflict with the unpopular war in Iraq. Iraq War protests. The anti-war position gained renewed support and attention in the build-up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq by the US and its allies. Millions of people staged mass protests across the world in the immediate prelude to the invasion, and demonstrations and other forms of anti-war activism have continued throughout the occupation. The primary opposition within the US to the continued occupation of Iraq has come from the grassroots. Opposition to the conflict, how it had been fought, and complications during the aftermath period divided public sentiment in the US, resulting in public opinion turning against the war for the first time in the spring of 2004, a turn which has held since. The American country music band Dixie Chicks' opposition to the war caused many radio stations to stop playing their records. Anti-war groups protested during both the Democratic National Convention and 2008 Republican National Convention protests held in St. Paul, Minnesota, in September 2008. Grassroots organizations started, including Campaign Against Sanctions and Military Intervention in Iran. 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin introduced prison sentences of up to 15 years for publishing fake news about Russian military operations. As of December 2022, more than 4,000 people, including Russian opposition politicians and journalists, had been prosecuted under Russia's fake news laws for criticizing the war in Ukraine. Israel-Palestine war. In May 2021, protests broke out following a flare-up of the Israel-Palestine conflict. In the US, thousands gathered in at least 7 major cities across the country in solidarity with Palestinians. The 2021 conflict lasted from May 6 until May 21 when a ceasefire was signed. The following day, an estimated 180,000 protesters gathered in Hyde Park, England, in what may have been the largest pro-Palestine demonstration in British history. Speeches were made by anti-war campaigners and trade union members, including demands that the UK government disinvest and sanction Israel. Messages such as Free Palestine and Stop the War were displayed on banners and placards and chanted by protesters. Protests continued into June, with, for example, protesters in Oakland, California, attempting to block an Israeli cargo ship from entering the port of Oakland on June 4, 2021. Multiple protests against the war took place around the world since the start of the 2023 Israel-Hamas war, in support of Palestine mostly. Conclusion. Poets, writers, musicians, and intellectuals write homages to the destruction of war, but the powers that be run the world and steamroll everybody, even public opinion. If you control the mainstream media, you can brainwash most of the people. Before the internet existed, the mainstream media could spin anything any way they wanted. Now with the internet, we are seeing the big news and social media websites with their agendas. They're spinning the narrative to the way they want. In the end, Big Brother or the machine wins. The best you can do is to know what's good and righteous as an individual. I live in a military city. War would be good for business. I talk to people and see how callous they are about death in war if they were to benefit from it. The causes of war go to greed. You have to get greed to get rid of war.